Hello, you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Correllian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And today, my guest is Krys Copeland from Correllian Publishing. Hi, Krys.
Hi, nice to be back.
Yes, indeed. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can comment in the chat room through whatever format you happen to be watching this on. And hello to Mary in the chat room.
Hi,
It's good to see you,
Mary.
Mary. And we can communicate directly. And Krys, what new things are going on with Correllian Publishing?
Well, we're hard at work on editing the book, and so that's been going very well today. I'm very excited to read through all these details that you have on each of the planetary triunes and sextiles and squares, and how each type, each connection between different planetary bodies holds a different meaning. And I love that concept about how you consider astrology to be mathematical. Could you kind of, enlighten the viewers on that?
Absolutely. And we want to say hello to Tom and to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Renee.
So my theory on astrology, oh, and hello to Antonio in the chat room,
Hi, Antonio.
is that astrology is a mathematical study of time and time cycles, that it doesn't really originate from planets and stars at all, but rather from the cycles of time, for which our ancestors used the position of planets and stars as a marker. And the reason I believe this is that, as anyone who is familiar with astrology knows, in the sort of Western astrology that we normally practice, the positions that we observe the planets in are not their actual positions. They haven't been for hundreds of years. If it was working on the position of stars and planets, it would not work. But it does work. Therefore, there has to be another explanation. My theory has always been that they used those stars and planets where they were about 2,000 years ago to mark out the cycles in time that they observed, and that they still serve that function. And hello to Michael in the chat room. Hello to Steve in the chat room.
Hi, Reverend Michael. Hi, Steve.
I'm a great believer in the study of time and time magic. And so perhaps it's not entirely surprising I would have come to that particular assumption. But again, when we look at the common theory of why astrology works, which is literally the position of stars and planets, it doesn't make any sense when they're not in that position. So I have come to the belief that centuries ago we observed these cycles and we marked them, and we've continued to follow that pattern to observe them, and that's why it works. So that's one of the things we talk about in Reverend Don's Book of Astrology, as well as all those different markers, or many of the different markers. Now, astrology is one of those subjects that would not fill a book, but rather a library. To have a full view of astrology would take an entire lifetime, I think, if we're going to talk about all of its history, all of its variations. This book is very much based on our contemporary Western astrology that's most commonly used, the one that I'm describing. And it goes into how to analyze, how to understand a chart, and the importance of charts. Because, a lot of people, they practice sun sign astrology. And I do that too. And it has a certain relevance. Hello to Alan in the chat room. Alan is a very noted astrologer. And he practices a very particular form of astrology based on earlier forms of astrology.
I'd be very curious to hear his points of view on it. Yes.
That would be a very interesting subject, actually, to talk about. It is, and that when I say that astrology is a subject that would fill a library rather than a book, that's a perfect example. A very different way of approaching it, which also can be very accurate. One of the things, at least in my mileage, that is interesting about astrology and many other things in this world is there's more than one way to approach it. And more than one system can have accurate results. But speaking of sun sign astrology is very simplistic, very wonderfully adapted to what used to be the newspaper crowd, and getting your little motivation for the day.
I certainly read it, especially when I was a teenager. I always had to grab
Yeah.
that part.
And I'm a believer that if you tell spirit you will listen to this, it will be accurate for you. But then I also believe the same thing about fortune cookies. And I find for myself they are. But it tells you only a tiny bit of what's going on. I mean, we all do have a sun sign. It is relevant. But we also have all these other things in our chart. There are all of these different planets, all of the different aspects between them. The signs they are positioned in are important. And the sun sign really doesn't tell you that much about yourself in many cases. In my case, I'm a Gemini, and I do have many Gemini characteristics, one of them being an emphasis on communication, media, writing, videography. These are all very Gemini things to do. But people who have known me over the years were often surprised to find out I was Gemini because I don't display what you would think of as Gemini behaviors.
Certainly
And the
not like
reason,
the negative behaviors associated with Gemini, because that's something that I kind of keep aware of just because I have an ex who was a Gemini. So
yeah, I'm not what most people expect a Gemini to be like. And a lot of the reason is the position of my Mercury and Venus, who are conjunct in Taurus, which gives me a very strong Taurian aspect. My mental capacity, my emotional capacity are both very strongly influenced by the Taurian nature, which is in some ways about as far from Gemini as you can get, even though it's the immediately preceding sign. But this is one of the things that learning how to interpret a chart, learning about the position of the different planets will tell you why you might not resemble that sun sign as much as you might think you would. Why you handle certain things in certain ways. My Mars, for example, is in Virgo. And Mars in Virgo tends to mean that I put a lot of emphasis on details. Anyone who's looked at my artwork will see that. Anyone who's read my writing will see that. That's partly because of that Mars in Virgo, but also in terms of things that give me stress in life or places where I might experience conflict. It's often over the details, the smaller things. And the larger things I can usually hold together pretty well. But I have that Virgo focus on the details in Martian aspects. Where your Mars is, where your Venus is, where your Mercury is, where your Jupiter is, where your Saturn is, these are all very important. Now, the outer planets, for example, Pluto, they're generational. Where they're positioned affects people for many, many years. And in astrology, Pluto is still thought of as a planet. I'm not entirely sure where astronomy has landed on that subject at present. I know they've gone back and forth, but Pluto never ceased to be viewed as a planet in astrology.
it's also interesting to note asteroids that might appear in your natal chart. So it doesn't necessarily even have to be a planet or a star like the sun to find meaning in it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It's a very very complex art when you really get into it. As I say, this particular book is really focused on reading the chart. It's heavily focused on the planets, but it is, I think, a very exhaustive examination of those subjects. So if you haven't already pre-ordered a copy, you can do that at CorrellianPublishing.com.
Yes, and I'm going to put in the exact link to the book so that everybody will have that in the chat here. But yeah, I was really excited as I was reading through and noticing that you have broken down literally every single planetoid, if you want to say, for Pluto, and talked in depth about what they mean in the
Hmm.
different signs. And
Yeah,
yeah, one thing that
and the different aspects to them.
yes, exactly, and how they appear in the chart, how they're clustered towards each other, or
Hmm.
maybe against each other. And one thing that I do get asked as a pagan atheist, especially from Christians, is why do I believe that something like astrology could be meaningful and real, but not the Bible? And for one, uh, my astrology chart just does make sense for me. Like
Hmm.
uh, in every way, it really communicates some details that you know I wouldn't necessarily have expected if it's just completely random and made
Yeah.
up and all of that. There's too many coincidences that make me
Hmm.
think, maybe there's something here.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that as well when I've done readings for friends, or when they've if they're also into astrology and they do their own readings, they find a very similar thing happening.
Hmm.
And in addition to that, every single astrology chart, even the horoscopes out of the newspaper, none of
Hmm.
them have ever told me to go and kill people who don't believe in astrology.
That's
So
true.
they've told me to do things like make sure I drink plenty of water because I have a tendency towards headaches. That's
Hmm.
great advice for everybody.
Yes, it
So
is.
that I've never gotten bad advice from an astrology reading. It's always been, these are things that can help you to live your life more easily, more comfortably, and to feel more comfortable in your own skin.
Hmm.
The Bible certainly does not give me any of those things. So, yeah, it's I'm not sure why there's such a tendency for people to dismiss it so easily and then so readily accept something that has a lot of negative and evil energy within it.
Well, I think we did a program last night on civil rights here on Correllian TV.
I watched that. It's amazing.
Thank you. One
Very
of the
enlightening.
comments, we were talking about the educational system, and I pointed out the Jesuit saying that if you give us the first 7 years of someone's life, you've given us their whole life. If you're trained to certain points of view, they can be very hard to break.
Yeah.
And many people, when it comes to something like the Bible, there are different ways people relate to it. If you look at it as a book of mythology and so forth, you have a very different relationship to it if you're looking, as opposed to looking at it as a literal thing. Um, and that complicates the situation because you're not talking about just one way of people being. But why do people accept that or anything else that can be negative? And you'd think it would be obvious. Well, they were raised to it. They were raised not to question it. And it's not just that. There are many other negative things that people. Well, racism. I mean, you would think that any reasonable person could see beyond racism, but there are many people who are otherwise reasonable who just can't move beyond it. Hopefully, that is something that's progressively changing. Um, and it's partly because it's so ingrained in them so deeply, so early, they don't even know it's there in many cases. Um, and hello to Sir Edward in the chat room. It's good to see you.
Hi, Ed. Great to see you. Yeah,
Um,
I found that talk last night really fascinating because Sir Ed actually brought this up to us in the chat, and I need to apologize to one everybody in the chat, but also to the general community because I dismissed it completely. I laughed at it. I
mm,
thought, oh, it's another one of those nut jobs. Who cares what they think? No one's going to listen to them. And for some backstory, in case you don't know. Um, this has to do with the post. I won't name the person that posted it because I'm not going to give him that kind of power. But he posted something saying that Correllians were indoctrinating children into Satanism, with with a photo of you, our
Mhm.
leadership, and several members of our community. And I was of the thought, oh, this is just another one of those crazies. And um and also at the same time, I was really focused more on the Satanism part, and I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, well, if he wants to call me a Satanist, that's better than being a Christian. So that was my first reaction to it. However, after listening to the panel discussion, I realized that you've actually held a mirror up to show a bias that I have developed since moving to the Netherlands from America.
Mhm.
I have a safety bias
Mhm.
that, no one's going to call the government and convince them that I will sacrifice my children to Satan, so they better come and get them, or that, I could lose my job for being in this faith, or have my home attacked by crazy Christians that want revenge on the Satanists. Um,
Mhm.
and those are things that American pagans and pagans all over the world
Mhm.
face every single day just for
Absolutely.
believing in their faith. I mean, well, it was just a few years ago that a member of the Correllian tradition, I believe is in Saudi Arabia, was beheaded.
Morocco.
In
Yeah.
Morocco, was beheaded for his beliefs, and that's shocking to me that that still
Mhm.
happens in modern day, as
Yeah, it was
civilized
pretty
as we call
shocking to all of
ourselves.
us.
Yes, and it's really eye-opening to see just how dangerous America has gotten, because that, your house could get swatted. There are all these terrible things that could happen, and yeah, we should definitely be more vocal against these people that are attacking us, not just
Mhm.
online on Facebook to get some likes and clicks and donations, but also in our daily lives, and
Mhm.
speak about this more within our community and show that we're not going to take that.
Mhm.
We're not going to put up with abuse from so-called Christians that are not acting at all, I think, like Jesus would have expected them to. So,
Well, and that's a very important point. Not all Christians are that way. There are
yes.
some very good
Hmm.
Christians out there, but there are also people like this. And yes, this person is a joke. But there are a number of people in American politics today who are jokes and very powerful. One of the comments I think we were talking about this before coming online, but maybe this person can't get anywhere in New York State. That's something that's often been remarked, but maybe someone in Florida or some other part of the country might choose to pull them in to talk there, where their words might have effect and where their bias will obscure the fact that this person is a bit of a joke.
And we're already seeing this kind of attack in the queer community as well,
Yes.
especially in Florida, especially in Texas. And also, I just want to say hello to Bright Eyes, who apparently
Yes.
is from Southwest Florida. So, thank you for fighting the good fight there, and continuing to support pagans that are in Florida right now. But yeah, it's really concerning to see, for an example, in Texas, my cousin had her wife quit teaching
Hmm.
this year because she would have been forced to report if there were any trans children in her
Hmm.
class, so that the parents could be arrested for child abuse. That's the point we're at in Texas,
Hmm.
and it's very Nazi-like. Um, Hopefully she'll be able to move out of there before things get worse for the entire queer community there. It's already been bad for trans people and has never really gotten better for trans people in Texas. But yeah, that's the danger that a lot of pagans are facing every day too.
Hmm. Yeah, it's why we cannot just ignore it. And if people would like to have a fuller discussion of this, if they'd like to see some of the things recommended to perhaps do, that broadcast here on Correllian TV goes into a great deal of detail. It involves Selena Fox, Byron Ballard, um, Phoenix Coffin Williams, Alyssa Kemp, myself, and Mary Hawk as the narrator, the
Moderator.
host,
Yeah.
moderator, and it does talk a lot about what can be done, and I'm sure we'll continue to follow the story, um, both in this individual story, but in the larger story, because this is something that we are seeing more examples of. And one of the points that was made last night is that this has been a constant through many years, but it was formerly a more remote constant. Every now and then it would come up, um, but the Christian nationalist or Christian dominionist movement is far more powerful now than any other time in my life,
Yeah.
and so we must be vigilant of our rights if we hope to keep them.
And
But
even here, where there is some relative safety from that, there's still an increase, a rise in Christian nationalism here. It's happening all over the world, and not just in Christian nationalism. Although, in my point of view, it seems like the data is saying that there are more issues in the fundamentalist Christian part. Not to offend your sister Alan, who's Pentecostal. I actually have several Pentecostal friends too, and I think they're for the most part, they're really amazing, caring people. Um, but for the hardcore fundamentalist groups, and we're talking, nowadays, 1 in 4 Christians identifies as an evangelical fundamentalist. And that means that they're voting against queer rights, they're voting against pagan rights, they're voting against women's reproductive freedom. These are all issues that are concerning to our community. We have a huge number of women, a huge number of queer people in our community, and we're going to have to start being allies towards each other and for ourselves going forward.
Absolutely. But coming back to Correllian Publishing.
Yes, that's actually, I do think that that's one way that we can start working on solving some of these issues. If we no longer had to rely on government sources or sources from secular secular that's being invaded now by Christian fundamentalism, if we could help our members find ways to have an income that is completely independent of anyone outside the pagan community and is solely brought forward from our community, that's a good place to be, I think,
Absolutely.
in this landscape, especially economically.
Well, it's also, for Correllian Publishing in particular, one of the things that was commented on last night, and also is just obvious, is the more educational materials that are available through us privately, the more we can offset the narrowing of public education. It's another way to work against that. I was speaking with Reverend Jason this morning, and there is a thing going around on Facebook about some new production about Alexander the Great, and someone complaining that they made him gay, which of course means that commenter knows nothing about Alexander the Great,
or
because well, that too. But if they think this was added into the story, they don't know the story, because for 2,300 years, it has been well known that the primary relationship of Alexander was Hephaestion, who is one of his generals. Even though they were both married women, even though they had other aspects to their lives. So it's not something added into the story, but it's something that is often left out by people who want to leave it out.
By historians who think they were just besties.
Well, by historians who want to disguise it.
Yeah.
And of course, Jason observed that the reason that he knew, as I knew, is that we had studied on our own. So the more that we can provide to pagan children and pagan people materials where they can study from a wider range of knowledge, the better off everyone will be. The more that we encourage people to study on their own, um, the better off we'll be, regardless of what's going on elsewhere in the world. So,
Absolutely. That's actually another part of that educational element. As pagans are being more and more marginalized in the
mm,
public school systems, more parents are considering private school or
mhm,
private homeschooling options. And you can, if you go through a private secular homeschool, you can always supplement with pagan materials.
mhm,
So while, Pastor Bob's kids may not get a proper education, your children will. And,
exactly. Well,
and
I
that's
often
what we
talk
can do.
about my mother, and my childhood bedtime stories were often mythology, Isis and Osiris, Greek mythology, other pieces of Egyptian mythology, the Iliad at certain points, which I'm not entirely sure how much I took away from the Iliad as a small child, but it was one of the things that she would read on my behalf. She also included the Pilgrim's Progress, kind of against her first thought, but my father pointed out that I would just accept it as an adventure story and not be corrupted by it, and
Mm.
that was true. I had no idea um, of the other levels of that story. I perceived it as kind of like a D&D adventure, and and presently I was ready for other stories. But the fact that she made that a point so early in life really had a lot to do with, I think, the broadness of my education. And when I could read for myself, I was ready to read for myself. The fact that she gave me very early in life um, collections of Renaissance art, which of course often have pagan themes and are some of the best art,
Yeah.
um, also helped me to have a much broader education than might have been available if she was not doing that, if my father was not doing that. And it is very important, I think, for our pagan parents to use every educational opportunity they have, because the wider society, even without this influence, isn't known for a great education. And most importantly is critical thinking. And if you're looking for the school system to teach your child how to think critically, it's not going to happen.
Good luck with that. Yeah. And
Um,
that's someone from work who worked in that educational system for several years.
and I think a lot of the teachers don't even know how to think critically. Not certainly not everyone, but it has been historically a rarish type of skill. But if you can teach it to your children early, they will have it forever. And
Absolutely. And
there
it
there
is
are some
something
very
that can be
enjoyable
taught.
ways. Yes,
Yeah.
it absolutely can be taught. Um, I remember being a very small child, and my mother would play with me a game called I Spy, in which you choose an object in the room, and um, one person attempts to guess it while the other person gives clues about its nature. Um, Usually starting at that, in that case anyway, with the question, is it larger or smaller than a bread box? Something which would mean very little to the modern audience. But at the time, it helped to tell you if you were looking at something big or small. But you would slowly work your way up to what it could possibly be. And this was before I knew how to read. It was very early, and it was a very fun way to work with critical thinking. And there are many others.
I think Mary in the chat, she probably has a ton of ideas. She says that she
Hmm,
homeschooled her own son. I would love to hear how she did that as a pagan mom. I think that would be a really fascinating discussion to hear about. And Alan chimed in with if they can afford a private Waldorf school, they can spend an entire grade on Norse mythology. And those are the kinds of things that you can do as a
Hmm.
pagan parent. It's definitely not easy to homeschool by any means. I've done it myself. It's a huge challenge. But if we have more support from the community, more communication between parents on how to go about doing these things, we could see a lot of change within our community in
Hmm.
one generation.
And I'm hoping that we will have more educational materials aimed at children from Correllian Publishing in the future.
I have an
Currently, we
announcement
have.
on that. Yeah. So I don't want to give all the details yet, but we do have a Will of the Year series in the works. We're hoping to publish the Beltane one. That is designed for children ages 8 to 12, but younger children. You can,
Hmm.
have mom and dad assist or parental units or whoever is in the family that's helping out with that. Feel free to, include those younger kids with it. There's a short story chapter book that is about some mythology. The
Hmm.
first one's going to be on Rhiannon and her love story for Beltane. And then along with that, there's a section for a ritual that children can do, children can lead, and background information for parents to talk about this, the meaning behind Beltane,
Hmm.
and how to approach those topics, because Beltane does touch a lot on fertility and sex and things like that. And we don't want our children feeling like they can't ask questions like that they are
Hmm.
silenced by those things. So
Yeah.
how to do that in an age appropriate way, little tips for parents, resources for parents. So keep an eye out for those things. And we're going to release on the Sabbath before the
Hmm.
one for the upcoming Sabbath, so that people will be able to order that in advance and have it delivered well before the Sabbath itself, so you can plan that with your child and read through the book together. Um, yeah, I'm hoping that people will really enjoy it. I certainly did reading through it. So,
So lots of interesting things coming in the future from Correllian Publishing. We want to say hello to Martin in the chat room.
hi, Martin.
And with
That's
that, I see that we have filled our half hour. So thank you, Krys, for joining me.
Thank you. Lovely to be here again.
Thank you. And with that, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us as we go forward to be vigilant on our rights and to be broad in our education. Help us to learn as much as we can of the world around us with an open mind and an open heart. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you are always with us. But from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed now and always. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Blessed to be.